Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be speaking with you guys today. As Catherine mentioned, I wanted to tell you guys all about how AI is impacting our Canadian financial services sector. But I wanted to start with a couple poll questions. So if you can head over to the poll, I want to know whether or not you think AI is going to be an important foundational career skill in your career. And secondly, I'm curious to know who's heard about Layer 6 AI. So if you can populate those two questions, I'll keep track in a moment. I'm going to flip to the agenda. I wanted to start off with an overview of Layer 6 AI, hence the question. The second piece I wanted to get into is Canada's AI and machine learning landscape. Third, I wanted to talk about some of the biggest opportunities for machine learning in the banking sector. And then last, I wanted to end off with some of the challenges that are impeding progress in this space. So starting off with Layer 6. Layer 6 is a leading edge machine and deep learning competitor. It was co-founded in 2011 by three founders. We have Tomi Putanen, Jordan Jacobs, and Max Volkovs. And about 7 years later, in 2018, it was acquired by TD Bank, becoming the bank's formal AI research lab. At the time, we had just 13 employees, but we've since grown to having over 75 employees coming from over 20 different countries. So we have an incredibly diverse team. And to date, we've delivered more than $140 million to the bank, spread across 40 different models. So running, and we're still counting and looking to have forward to having more progress. But we don't just do work in the banking sector. One of the things that's really core to our culture at Layer 6 is competing in competitions, things like the Rexus Challenge, attending conferences, things like NeurIPS, where we do talks and we have papers accepted, and doing collaborations with top-tier institutions like the Vector Institute or the University of Toronto. These are so important because they really help us keep our skills sharp. They benchmark our skills against the world's top talent, and we also get the opportunity to learn about new and interesting problems. We get access to interesting data sets, and we really bring those insights back and apply them to the work that we do at TD Bank. I'd say at the beginning, our expertise really centered around search, time series forecasting, recommender systems, and computer vision. And we've really mastered reinforcement learning and natural language processing in the past few years. So those are just some of our core expertise. Keep going to hit next, and I realize I have to click on the slides. We do work all across the bank on both sides of the border, so in the US and in Canada. We're doing work to help underwriters accelerate their decisions. We're doing work with wealth, retail banking, insurance, TD Auto Finance. So really any business within the bank, you can find machine learning opportunities there. There's lots of things that center around, predicting the next best action, where we engage with our customers, when we should engage with our customers. During collections, there's tons of opportunities to identify when a customer might be delinquent and give us the opportunity to reach out in advance and see if we can understand their situation and really help them out. And even in the digital space, we're using machine learning to help predict customers' balance so that we can avoid things like insufficient funds fees. These just leave a terrible taste in our customers' mouths. So just wanted to showcase the breadth of work we do at Layer 6. And beyond the core banking sector, under TD's Ready Commitment, which is a commitment that the bank made to invest real dollars in things that are for social good and improve social outcomes in society. So we do a ton of healthcare work in this space, from pneumonia and breast cancer detection to diabetes research and polypharmacy. And more recently, through the pandemic, we've been driving quite a bit of thought leadership and impactful research in the COVID space. So that's a quick overview of Layer 6. If you could head back over to the poll, I wanted to see who sees Canada as actually an important contender in the AI race. We so often see America and China and Europe, but who thinks Canada is a contender? So if you can head over to the poll, I'd be interested to see your answers. I don't know if there's a way I can actually see the poll live. I was hoping to be able to see your answers, but I will keep moving for the sake of time. So let me jump into Canada's AI landscape. We've seen so many applications hit the mainstream, from personal assistants like Google or Amazon's Alexa, to recommendation engines like Netflix Next Best Show, or Amazon's Next Best Product, or Netflix Next Best Show, Spotify's playlist recommendation engine. A ton of mainstream applications, but who really knows about what the leading edge applications are coming out of Canada and all around the world? I thought I'd start with some really cool showcases. or applications of AI that I just don't feel hit the media, but I think are so much more impactful and really deserve the attention. So here we have sitting down Marzia Gassemi. She's designed a suite of machine learning tools that help make sense of messy clinical data. Her algorithms can help predict things like how long a patient will stay in the hospital, whether or not they'll need blood transfusions or ventilators, and how they'll really fare, whether or not they'll pass away. And this really helps hospitals optimize the healthcare that they provide. She's also named MIT's top 35 innovators under 35 and just an incredibly accomplished individual. Similarly accomplished, we have Graham Taylor from the University of Guelph. He's using machine learning to make the agricultural field food systems more efficient. He's designed a smart prototype that can use image recognition to identify pests, and it negates the need to have to send those samples off to labs. So it just drastically shortens the time cycles there, and farms can take action much more quickly to save their crops. And he's also working on smart unmanned aerial drone surveillance for farms. So some cool applications in the agricultural field. And the last one I wanted to show, here we have Frank Rudzik. He's using speech recognition to identify the early onsets of things like Alzheimer's and depression. His company, Winterlight, has users essentially read what they see on a tablet, and based on variations in grammar, pitch, and vocabulary, his algorithms can accurately predict things like really cognitive decline. So Alzheimer's and depression are the first two, but he's trying to expand that scope. So just some really cool applications coming out of the Canadian academic landscape. And I bring this up because what some of you may not know is Canada was actually the first country in the world to come out with a national AI strategy. And it's really for a few, as part of this strategy, it involved the creation of 3 AI institutes. We have Vector in Toronto, we have Amy in Edmonton, and Mila in Montreal. And the reasons they created this institute, which I'll kind of get to in a moment, but the motivation was, first, they recognized the economic potential of AI. And I think that's nowadays table stakes. The second thing is some of the world's most prominent and influential thinkers within the field of AI actually have their roots in Canada. We have Yoshua Bengio, who's pioneering deep learning research in Montreal. Actually, I think he's a part of Mila. And then we have Rich Sutton, who's pioneering reinforcement learning as part of Amy in Edmonton. And then right here in Toronto, we have Jeffrey Hinton, who's also known as the godfather of AI and a founding member of the Vector Institute. His journey is so interesting. He spent most of his career, like 20 years of people laughing at his research and more or less thinking he was a joke, but he believed in himself so much he continued to push. And then probably slightly before, but in and around his discovery of the ImageNet or creation of the ImageNet in 2012, he really turned the tables, kind of broke one of the long AI winters. There were 2, and just revolutionized the field. And him and Yoshua Bengio actually recently won the Turing Award, which is quite a distinction to achieve. So some top talent coming out of Canada. And the last factor is Canadian brain drain. So we had all this great talent, and they were actually leaving our jurisdiction to go head up the major chief AI roles of a number of big tech companies, places like Google and Microsoft and Facebook. And so the government wanted to create these institutes to increase production of talent. It's kind of a build it and they will come approach. The hope was that if we increase the production of talent, these big tech giants would end up just opening labs up in the area rather than picking off the talent from abroad. And since these institutes have opened, you can see this is a little bit outdated, but we've had so many labs open up shop in the area. Research has found that if you place a PhD researcher for in and around 18 months after they graduate, they typically end up making that place their home. And so by giving them all these exciting opportunities to choose from, in addition to the big players we already have in the industry from manufacturing and the big banks, the hope is that we keep a lot of this AI talent in the country. Moving on to the next section, before I get into it, if you could flip over and check out the poll, where are the biggest machine learning opportunities within the banking sector? I'm curious for your thoughts. I have a couple, which I'll jump right into. The first is, sorry, these polls keep popping up, so I got to close them. The first is, so firstly, let me establish that AI isn't new to banks. They've been using it for quite some time in a number of different areas. We see it used in risk management, to manage fraud and identify money laundering activities, and of course do credit risk assessments. In the operations space, we see it used conveniently to automate mundane manual tasks. And then of course in the marketing and client experience space, we see it used to personalize marketing messages and advice for our customers. But I think 2 of the biggest opportunity areas that I see for the machine learning space is, I just spoiled it, credit. And the other one is fraud, which I'll get to in a moment. The reason I think credit is such an impactful area is because, firstly, it's a highly regulated space, which actually in some ways makes it harder to use new technologies, but the data quality is so much higher because it's regulated. So you start off with a great pool of data, and anyone who knows machine learning knows kind of garbage in, garbage out. So when you have good data quality and vast pools of long historical data, you can build really powerful machine learning models. And so we're finding opportunities all across the credit life cycle. You can use it during originations to adjudicate customers, and during account management to help set credit limits or predict delinquent behavior, during collections to identify a customer's propensity to roll. Of course, I've mentioned there's fraud applications, and in collections and recovery, we can use it to, agents place so many calls and send so many emails, and it just often doesn't translate into the successful recovery of debt. So machine learning can be used to identify the best time and channel to engage with a customer, or even the best strategy or settlement to deploy on a case-by-case basis. And then last but not least, we can use it for lead identification and identifying customers who are at risk of leaving the bank, which gives the bank an opportunity to insert a timely offer in hopes of them keeping their business within TD. And of course, the other area I mentioned is fraud. Fraud, unlike credit, is a lower regulated space. So I would say we've certainly dealt with our share of data quality issues here, but there's still a ton of data. And because it's less regulated, it's actually easier to get models into production. And anyone who knows fraud knows it's a fast moving pace. Cybersecurity is constantly evolving. And so you want to be able to build models quickly to fend off these fraudsters. And going back to there's absolutely tons of opportunities in the customer experience space, marketing, operations. As I mentioned, we're doing work all across the bank. There's no shortage of machine learning and AI related opportunities. But I put credit and fraud as the front-running biggest opportunities because they're getting at the core of what a bank does. Banks lend money out and gather interest on those loans, and they're trying to defend themselves against losing that money. So if we can really optimize these areas using machine learning, we can improve the efficiency ratio of the bank, and that's at the core of what banks do. So I really think there's a competitive advantage to be had there. And before I get into the last section, I'm curious what you think the biggest challenges are impeding AI adoption. I'm sure this varies industry from company to company. I put some here. I probably should have put other buckets, but I'm curious what you see as the biggest challenges. And before I move on, before I flip to the next slide, I'm going to give you guys a moment to insert your answers. I think one of the first challenges we've seen is regulatory uncertainty. I don't know if you're familiar with the E23 OSFI's regulation, or there's the SR11, which is the equivalent in the US. These were put out before machine learning and AI really started to have a big impact on the bank. And I think the uncertainty of, banks are scared to make the wrong move. If they make the wrong move, there's major penalties. It can have if it makes front page news, it's a huge negative impact on the bank's profits. And again, they get fined. So they really are trying to do the right thing. But with new technologies, especially things they don't understand, banks want to move cautiously. But on the flip side, these innovative capabilities are really good for our customers. If we can improve the efficiency ratio of our credit assessments, we can actually lend credit more broadly to more customers. So the regulators recognize that there's an opportunity and they need to help the banks accelerate this. And so there's forums going on both sides of the border in the US and Canada that I've been involved with, where the regulators are really reaching out to banks and trying to collaborate in a new form, a little bit less of a traditional model than we're used to. Flipping to the slide, hopefully you guys have answered the questions at this point. The other one is standardizing tools and capabilities. There's so many data and analytics teams siloed in different businesses in different parts of the bank. And this creates tons of challenges in really, think about if you're a model validator and you're trying to validate these models that are getting submitted from different model development platforms using different techniques and processes. I do not envy their role. It must be so challenging to see all these different variations, and it just elongates the cycle time that it takes to get through model validation, which is challenging enough. And so I think a big opportunity for banks is to standardize model development tools and capabilities, or I'll even broaden it to model lifecycle tools and capabilities all across the bank. So some centralization can help there. I think another piece is data quality. I've mentioned this before. It's such a challenge, garbage in, garbage out. And so much work goes into cleansing the data and preparing it for model development. I think a lot of banks would do well to kind of kick off a broad effort to centralize data assets and clean it up before we get to model development. And I think a number of banks are likely doing that. And the other piece is access. Because data is so siloed in different areas, it takes forever to find the data and procure the data. And once you do, even getting permission to access the data is a highly manual process today. So just lots of timelines. I know I'm getting close to time. So the last item I wanted to touch on is a lack of a clear AI strategy. That's really a top-down strategy supported by executives that keeps everyone moving in the same direction, aware of what the priorities are. I think this one can't be stressed enough. And I think a lot of organizations are doing this spot method where they're just doing a use case here, a use case here. And that's a great way to get your feet wet. But if you really want to accelerate and move forward in this space, I think having a unifying AI strategy is going to be key. So with that, I wish I could see I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I can't see the answers to your poll. I was hoping to kind of have some feedback dialogue there, but I know I'm running short on time. So happy to flip to the questions. Thank you so much for the time, and sorry for the technical difficulties at the beginning. It wasn't working on my laptop, but always a pleasure to be part of Rework, and I hope to be back sometime soon.